Good morning once again from the homeschool library. As always, I'm Brad. Glad to have you aboard. So I figured it's time to give you folks an update on where I'm at with my reading plans for the month of November. Made a couple of videos ago. I gave you that TBR video of what I'd planned on reading, and I asked you folks to hold me accountable to that. And if you're going to do that, I need to be able to let you know where I stand in coming through with my plan. So here we go. Now I know I'd started, and I mentioned in that video last time that I'd kind of gotten a little bit of a head start on reading a couple of these before November the 1st, but it was close enough that I hadn't finished all that many of them. So as a whole, it's my November reading plan. And the primary ones that I listed in there was these Sons of Texas books. This is the one that I had actually finished prior to the start of November. But again, it's close enough, and as part of the series as a whole, I wanted to let you know my thoughts and impressions on all of these. So the Sons of Texas books, if you remember from that previous TBR video, it's a 6-book series. I have finished the first 3. I'm just about halfway done with the 4th now already. But as you can see here, the name listed is Tom Early. Tom Early was a house name that, in the case of these first 3 books, was actually Elmer Kelton. Is the one who wrote these. Now, the original 3, they have been re-released under Elmer Kelton's own name, although the last 3 books 4, 5, and 6, to my knowledge, remain out of print. They're good. I'm enjoying them. Well, later, more on that later. But for now, the Sons of Texas here starts out in 1816, 1817 with the Lewis family, a man named Mordecai Lewis. Now, in a lot of it says right here at the top, Book 1 in the exciting new saga of America's boldest frontier. In some of the later books, it heavily advertises that the reminiscence of the Sackett series by Louis L'Amour. Very much hoping to bring in fans of L'Amour, and especially the Sacketts. And I get the comparisons there, but I would say that any really similarity is cursory at best. The Lewis saga here of the Sons of Texas, it's very much more a multi-generational saga, although the Lewis family, they seem to run long on boys, just like the Sacketts did. And there is a bit of a blood feud with another group of Tennessee. Yeah, they're also from Tennessee originally, before heading west. And the Lewises have their Blackwood family, whereas the Sacketts had their Higginses, for you Sackett fans out there. But again, that's really where the similarity kind of ends. The Lewises are very different kind of people than the Sacketts. I'll let you read them, and you form your own judgment on that. But again, if you're fans of one, I think you'll be fans of the other. But the comparisons actually, I think, are fairly superficial. So we'll leave that at that. More into the book itself. Elmer Kelton is one of the greatest Western authors of all time, and these first 3 books really shine. They're really wonderful. I would say one of my favorite Western series out there, probably in my top 5. I'd have to make a ranking video for maybe some of my favorite Westerns coming up here in the future. So Mordecai Lewis here is the patriarch of the Lewis family. Again, originally from Tennessee. Opens up in 1816, 1817 at a time when Texas was still part of the Empire of Spain. Spanish rule at that time was very, very brutal, especially for the part that was the northern part of the part that was Texas. It was so much of an outlier to the Spanish government in Mexico City that the forces, the military that they had out there were pretty brutal, pretty hostile to anyone trying to come in. But this Mordecai Lewis he's what's called a man of the cane. He's an adventurer. He is a family man. He's got a farm back home in Tennessee, loves his wife, adores his children, but he's the kind of guy, he always needs to know what's beyond, what's out there, where the headwaters of the river come from, what's beyond the other side of the mountains, what's past the horizon. He's got to know. He's got to see it for himself. And he's been out to Texas. He sees this kind of golden land of opportunity that he feels like, sort of falls in love with it. It really gets into his soul. He goes back home to Tennessee, spends some time with his family, but he's got this idea. He wants to go back to Texas as an excuse to round up some wild horses, bring them back home, and sell them to make some money. So he gets a group of fellow adventurers with him, one of whom is this Cyrus Blackwood, the patriarch of the Blackwood family that are just kind of a bunch of shiftless, coward, and nobody likes the Blackwoods. And Cyrus Blackwood, if you remember the movie Old Yeller, again, I'm talking movie, not book, the character of Bud Searcy, played by Jeff York, when I was reading about Cyrus Blackwood, that's the image that kept coming to mind. If you can think of a more vulgar version of Bud Searcy from Old Yeller, that's Cyrus Blackwood. Lazy, always wanting somebody else to do his work, never pulling his weight, drunk and vulgar. There's your patriarch of the Blackwood family. Well, they get this group together. They go back out to Texas. Despite warnings of the Spanish soldiers that are patrolling the border, don't let them catch you, they take the risk. They get out, they start rounding up the horses, and they are pretty quickly caught by a Spanish patrol who's out. And the Spanish officer, whose name escapes me, he has a history of brutalizing not only the Americanos that occasionally cross over the border, but even the what we now call the Mexican locals. The difference between the Spanish purebloods and the Mexican folks that lived out there, especially along the border as well. They did not see eye to eye, and already by this time, 1817. There are rumblings, there are pushings for Mexico to break off from Spain, to push out their Spanish overlords. So that's a plot line that's kind of in the background. But for the meantime, Mordecai Lewis and his party, they have to worry about the Spanish soldiers. And again, they are caught up to almost immediately. Mordecai is killed. Shot right in the head in front of his young son, Michael. Michael had followed his dad against Mordecai's wishes from Tennessee. He'd gotten far enough out that by the time that they found him, it was too late to send him back home. So they brought him out, kind of a test of manhood, father-son bonding time. So Michael sees his father murdered by this Spanish officer. The entire party is slaughtered. Cyrus Blackwood he was off-site. He'd gone out to chase some. Oh no, he had actually been. He'd kicked out of the party. They were finally sick and tired of him, and they ran him off. Well, as soon as he left, he was picked up by the Spanish patrol, and he sold him out, trying to save his own life. Which is how they caught up to the Lewis party. And the only ones left alive were Michael, who had been wounded, Cyrus Blackwood, and another one of the party, an old frontiersman smuggler by the name of Eli Pleasant. Eli was out scouting some horses that had escaped from the main group. Well, the Spanish officer, after killing the rest of the party, and only Cyrus and Michael were there left alive, he ordered his subordinate officer, this Lieutenant Zaragoza, to kill them. And then he took off. Well, Zaragoza, who was not Spanish, he was Mexican, despite serving in the Spanish military. He was uncomfortable with the brutality of his superior officers and decided to let Michael and Cyrus go. Cyrus just took off, ran back home, leaving Michael there for dead. Then Eli Pleasant arrives. He finds Michael, nurses him back to health as much as he can, throws him on a horse, and hauls him back to Nacogdoches in Louisiana, where he leaves them with a family there of both Spanish and French extraction, where he's nursed back to health by the beautiful young daughter who he eventually falls in love with until he's healthy enough to ride back home to Tennessee. Several years later, in 1821, after Mexico has finally thrown off the yoke of Spanish oppression, they're now their own independent country. Michael, he's seen Texas. He can't get it out of his blood. He's got to go back. So he takes with him his younger brother, Andrew, and they go back to Texas. They arrive there as part of the original 300 colonists and settlers that were brought in by Moses and Stephen Austin. Austin had started a large colony there after Mexico allowed immigration and settlers for the northern part of Texas. And they settle, they start making a farm life. Michael brings his wife Marie out, they settle, they build a couple of cabins, and that's the end of the book. Leading on to book 2. Michael and Andrew are doing what they can to break out their land, become successful farmers. Michael, of course, being a married man, has a little bit more land than his younger brother Andrew. There's a lot of politics in this one, talking about how the colony of Austin is growing, relations between the Americano settlers and the growing state of Mexico. Mexico's kind of their provisional capital in San Antonio. Austin is a major character in this one. There's a lot of real history thrown in these, especially in the first book, where if you've kind of got to know some deep cuts into your Texas history, otherwise you might not recognize it as real happenings that were coming in. A lot of these early, they called them filibusters, with not only Americans, but a few other nationalities as well, would be pushing into Mexico. They were going to try to claim it for whatever flag, usually their own, sometimes American. And they'd go in with, a couple hundred or even as little as a few dozen men and think that they were going to take over Texas and Mexico from Spain. And obviously it never worked out well for them. And that still the environment that Mordecai and Michael they're trying to build a life out of. There's some family dynamics there where Michael, he's very much his father's son. He keeps wanting to go off and explore further and further west. He's gone longer from home. Every time he's gone, his wife Marie is left there to sort of fend for herself. Andrew takes exception to this. He grew up this way, seeing what his father had done. And he sort of develops this protective bond towards his brother's wife that he's very careful of, letting that go too far, but he recognizes it for what it could potentially develop into, and they sort of pull away from each other over that. All of the everyone who knows Andrew says, you know what, you need to go back and find yourself a wife. So he does that. He heads back towards East Texas, towards Nacogdoches, and actually becomes involved in the Fredonian Rebellion, which was an early push of some of the American colonists who would come later after the original kind of 300 that Austin had brought in. And they decided that they were going to declare their independence from Mexico. It all came to nothing. But that event really was a push for Mexico to stop the settlers from the American side of the Sabine River from coming into Texas. It was a much bigger issue for them in Mexico City than it even was for the colony or for the American side. And if you remember that Lieutenant Zaragoza from the first novel, he's still around. He decides to resign his commission and go back to just being a farmer with his wife and young son. He's tired of killing, just tired of the life of a soldier. He's developed good relations with the Lewis brothers, but his reputation for his military service comes into play a few times in helping out the Lewis brothers, even though he's retired now. That is pretty much the story of book 2, The Raiders. Tension is building. A lot of things are happening. Moving into book 3, which starts in, I believe, 1828. The push for Texas to become independent is in full swing. Stephen Austin is doing everything that he can to hold the peace, to keep things together. Those original colonists are still loyal to Mexico. They consider themselves Texians, Mexican citizens, just kind of their own extraction. Enter more Lewis family. A third brother, James, comes out along with their uncle Frank and his family. I'm sorry, cousin Frank and his family, as well as his sister Annie. They all come from Tennessee, right at the point where Mexico had passed a law banning further immigration into Texas. Unless you already had your papers, you could not enter Texas. You'd be arrested, sent back home at best. Well, the rest of the Lewis family had left Tennessee prior to that law being passed, so they didn't have their papers. They were met at the border by, again, we're bringing back that Lieutenant Zaragoza from books 1 and 2, a retired Mexican officer. He gets wind of what's going on, and he tries, using his military reputation, tries to help them out. He does succeed in that after they had been arrested by former Lieutenant Zaragoza's former subordinate officer, originally Corporal Diaz. Diaz, as a young man, while Mexico was still under the yoke of Spain, his family had suffered the brutality of their Spanish overlords. They had moved out of Texas across the Sabine into Nacogdoches and were treated very poorly on the American side as well. So not only does he hate Spain, he also hates Americans. That is a point of contention between he and his former officer Zaragoza. Even though the two maintain a very respectful friendship, this is a point that they disagree on. They disagree how things will continue on into the future. And both hope that they're wrong. Both are sure that they are right. But anyway, Zaragoza does. He helps out the Lewis family. They get into the Austin colony. They get their papers. They get their land grants. And they try to start their lives. James, however, is cut from a little bit different cloth than his two older brothers. He was young enough when his father Mordecai was killed and Michael headed west that all he's living on is memories. He idolizes his older brother, tries to do and act and think the way that he imagines Michael would think, even though he's usually not correct. And this causes a lot of problems. Not only for the Lewis family specifically, but for relations between the Americans and the Indians, between the Americans and the Mexicans. He's a problem to a point where they tell him he should never have come to Texas. And he finally does have to flee. There are some former convicts from Mexico City that the Mexican authorities they released from jail, they put him in the army and sent him north to patrol Texas. The story was in hopes that they would cause enough problems amongst the Texan settlers that then Mexico could come in and completely stamp out any potential further resistance, with the memory of that earlier Fredonian rebellion still fresh in their minds. Well, as you know from Texas history, that's exactly what happened. Relations on both sides continued to sour, becoming more and more violent. There were certainly a lot of native Texan Mexicans who were not fan of what was going on, and enter at this point Santa Anna, who becomes president of Mexico on the promise that he was going to restore the original Constitution, and that didn't happen. He started marching through Texas, wiping out any kind of rebellion with every bit of the brutality that the earlier Spaniards had, if not more so. And yeah, things started to sour. The Blackwoods, by the way, are still around. If you remember them from book 1, in book 2, two of Cyrus's older sons, Finis and Luke, and actually 3 of them, and the third brother Isaac, who we met all the way back in chapter 1 of book 1. They had come to Texas, also seeking land. They still have this blood feud against Michael Lewis specifically, but the entire Lewis family as a whole, going all the way back to Tennessee. Isaac is the best of the bunch. He is, while he's still loyal to his family, he's there. He's just trying to save them from themselves, essentially. He's still not trusted by the Lewis boys, even though they recognize him as, like I say, the best of the bunch. And he tries to do what's right. He's got good in his heart. He suffers from being a Blackwood. At the end of the story, it culminates with leading up into the Battle of the Alamo, where both Isaac Blackwood and former Lieutenant Zaragoza wind up. They make their last stand there with the heroes of the Alamo. And one part, maybe I shouldn't give this away as a spoiler, but it was so good that I have to share it with you. This corporal, now promoted to Lieutenant Diaz, who was Zaragoza's former subordinate officer, he's hoping, as the Mexican army under Santa Anna is building their force around the Alamo, he has this kind of internal monologue with himself that he's hoping that his friend Zaragoza is not inside the walls there, knowing that he feels that Zaragoza's got very confused loyalties. He doesn't have it in himself to consider Zaragoza a traitor, but he doesn't understand the dynamic that he's a part of. And of course, after the battle, as Santa Anna orders all of the bodies burned, Diaz is in there, and he sees Zaragoza's body being hauled out, and he tries to pull him away and begs Santa Anna for the right to bury this man based on his character, his nature, his military service. Santa Anna considers him a traitor and orders his body burned like all of the others. And in that moment, Diaz, he gets it. He realizes that he's been a part of something much larger than himself, and he immediately develops this intense hatred for Santa Anna and the system that he's become a part of. And Diaz's story does conclude in book 3 as well. I won't tell you how that happens. You got to read it for yourself. And read it you should. These first 3 books, Sons of Texas the Raiders, and Sons of Texas the Rebels, all by Elmer Kelton, one of the greatest Western authors to have ever put out a novel. If you're a fan of Westerns, if you like The Sackets by Louis L'Amour, read them. Even if you just want to read a good book, read these first 3. I have started on book 4. Now, book 4, while still under the house name of Tom Early, this one again is out of print along with books 5 and 6. Sons of Texas the Proud. This was written by a different author. His name just suddenly escapes me. I'm sorry. I'll put his name in the comments unless I think of it here in the next few seconds. And the man who wrote this, he was another Western author, very prolific. He's one of those guys, you've probably read his stuff if you're a fan of the Western genre. You've probably read his stuff without realizing it. He was another one of those who wrote under any number of various pen names. You can definitely tell that it's a different author. I will say that if there was any kind of length of time between the time you read book 3 and book 4, you might not notice the subtleties as much. Again, book 3 came out in, I think it was 1990. The first 2 were 1989, 1990. Book 4 here came out in January of 92. So there was a little more than a year between the publication of book 3 and book 4. I don't know if the original story in these first 3 was supposed to just be complete in that, because it really does wrap up a really great trilogy. Maybe they were so popular. I don't know if the intent was to continue the series from book 1. I don't know. Because book 4, 5, and 6 are all written by 3 different authors. So if you read them probably originally, you read 3 when it came out, you read book 4 when it came out, you may not notice kind of the subtle differences. But reading book 4 right on top of book 3, I put down book 3 and I read the first chapter in book 4. So the differences are a lot more obvious, I think, to me. And you'd probably notice them as well. The quality isn't quite the same. I'd say it's a little more, I'll use the word pedestrian. It's just, it doesn't feel as authentic as Kelton's writing does, which is what so many people love about Kelton. He's so authentic in his writing. It's standard Western fare. The characters, they're just a little bit different. One example I can think of, just to throw this out there, in the first 3 books, one thing that seems to a conversation that happens between the characters fairly often is the issue of coffee. Coffee is scarce. Coffee is expensive out here in the new country of Texas. And a lot of the characters, they're just yearning for a cup of coffee, but people do the best they can with, parched grain or roasted root, and they make a fairly poor but acceptable coffee substitute, because true coffee is it's so hard to come by. In book 4, people are drinking coffee like they'd be drinking anything. It's just, people come over to the house. Hey, is there any coffee left? We'll start a new pot of coffee. And that's almost jarring a little bit. Now, granted, it's a different world by the time book 4 has started. Things are getting more prosperous. The American colonies of Houston and Austin are growing. There's more immigration. They are becoming wealthier. So coffee is probably an easier commodity to be had. But that discrepancy is never even brought up. I find that interesting. Like I say, it's almost a little bit disconcerting how just blatant that transition is, with no remarks from the author whatsoever. So I'm still loving book 4. I'm really enjoying it. I'm looking forward to completing the series, and I wanted to give you a review of these to let you know where I'm at, and I'm going to get them done by the end of November. I'm going to finish the series, as well as those other books that I mentioned, those other 3. If you don't know which ones I'm talking about, go back to that video a couple of months ago for my November TBR. Check that out and let me know what you think. Have you read the Sons of Texas books? Have I intrigued you to read them yourselves? Track them down. Again, the first 3 are pretty easy to come by. You got to look for them under Elmer Kelton's name. Book 4, 5, and 6, that may be an eBay thing if you want to track those out. You may be able to find them in a used bookstore. Me personally, I've never seen them since they were originally on the shelves. I don't know that I've specifically looked for them, but I think I'd recognize them if they popped out. So maybe you'll get lucky. Track them down, read them, let me know what you think back here. And with that, I'll see you on the next video. Brad out. Bye.